Welcome to the Decoding Innovation podcast series, brought to you by the EY Nottingham Spurk Innovation Hub, where we explore the innovative technologies, business models, and ideas that are shaping the future of industries. During each episode, we meet with stakeholders at the cutting edge to discuss innovations in their space, challenges they need to overcome, and their outlook on the future.
Welcome to this episode of the EY Nottingham Spurk Innovation Hub Decoding Innovation podcast. I'm your host, Brent Dersch, and I'm joined today by Fred Schonenberg, who's the founder of VentureFuel. Fred, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Brent, thanks for having me on. I'm excited to chat with you about innovation. It's my favorite subject in the world.
That's convenient. That's my favorite topic too. So let's go. So how about we start out, Fred? Could you start out by maybe talking a little bit about your personal journey, your career journey to date, and what kind of led you to start up VentureFuel?
Yeah, I'm a multi-time founder. I was very much in the ad tech, martech world, and realized that all these clients of mine that were the Fortune 500s kept asking the question, "What's next? Is there a new way to connect with consumers? Is there a technology that helps us bridge between one thing and the other?" Right? And it was a constant thirst. And I asked the question, aren't you guys already doing this? And they said, yeah, it's very theoretical though, right? We're looking at our 2040 plans or 2030 plans. And we want some tangible outcomes, wins that we can kind of put on the scoreboard. And as that conversation was happening, I very serendipitously had a dinner with a high school friend's little brother who had a startup, and he spent the whole dinner complaining he couldn't get a meeting with those same big companies that kept saying, "What's next?" And that's really, at that dinner is where VentureFuel was born, because I said to him, I was like, look, the best way to fuel your venture's growth is by getting deals with these large Fortune 500s. That'll change your valuation. It'll change your ability to get other Fortune 500s on board. It'll be really this sort of like inflection point for you as a startup. And I know for a fact that I could name 10 off the top of my head, large companies that were really looking for what's next, new solutions. And that's where VentureFuel came from. And, I launched the company 10 years ago at this point. So we've been spending a lot of time understanding how innovation works in large organizations, how startups and big companies play together. And it's been a really exciting journey.
So could you provide a bit of an introduction in terms of the service or the capability that VentureFuel provides?
Yeah, so we help large organizations innovate better, faster, more efficiently through startup partnerships. So we start with challenges, problems that the organization's trying to solve for, or large growth areas, right? And then we'll go find the best startups in the world to solve that problem for them in a new way. And we build the frameworks and processes to do that repeatably and with tangible outcomes. So it's a little bit less startup theater and startup petting zoo, as we joked about in a prep call, and more about like, can we actually solve some real problems here that scale when solved for the larger organization? And by the way, we do that, and that serves the startup. So someone asked me, like, what is VentureFuel? My quick answer is like, it's what corporates need and what startups want. And it's that sort of intersection of the two. We remove a lot of the fluffery of, mentorship and things that a lot of people put into place here, when really, like, a lot of startups have sophisticated teams that have sophisticated solutions. And what they really want is to get in with a corporate that is trying to solve for whatever their solution is. And so we really create that bridge to accelerate those two, but specifically with an idea for how it commercializes innovation for the large company.
So one of the terms you mentioned was partnership. And, I think when a lot of big companies start talking about working with startups, they come at it with this attitude of, this is a merger and acquisition type activity, or, I'm going to invest and take an equity stake. But the partnership concept is yet another alternative. And I think that's a unique part of your angle. So could you unpack that a little bit more?
Yeah, we often say we're the white space in between R&D and M&A. And if you go back to an old framework that a lot of people in the space know, is this buy, build, and partner framework. And big companies are awesome at buying and building. There are outcomes of those two activities. People can argue about whether how effective those are, but big companies know how to buy and they know how to build. But the partner piece is just a muscle that hasn't been really flexed in an appropriate way, and that's a vendor relationship at the end of the day, in my opinion. Where this really is interesting is when you can start to play with new solutions and you create partnerships, whether that's joint development agreements, whether that's commercial agreements. That's where this becomes really interesting. So we sit in between R&D and M&A in a way that augments R&D activity. So you kind of take the internal, the best of the internal, help them build with external technologies and startups. And by the way, that is a de-risking function for the M&A team, because you get to see startups earlier in their life cycle. You get to actually work with them with the business units that then informs your strategy and also helps you understand who are these players. Are they interesting at a more nascent stage before they're at the premium price that tends to get most big companies when they hit the M&A stage?
So building on that theme, how do you know when the partnership or the dating relationship is working, and how do you know when it's not? So what does a good partnership look like, and maybe what does a not so good, a not so productive partnership look like?
Yeah, it starts with having a problem worth solving on the big company side. You really it has to be something that is worth paying to solve. Meaning it can't just be like, oh, I don't know, I just kind of want to work with a bunch of generative AI startups. Like, no. Like, what is the problem? Is it a pain? We always try and get past like the vitamin versus the painkiller. Is this something that is somewhat urgent and important? That's a big piece of it, because if we know that, then we know there's value in solving for the problem. We then look globally for the best startup solutions. How we determine what's the right partner. We have a sort of an extensive rubric we use that looks at everything. We call it the 8 Ps, but it's everything from the pairing, meaning how does it pair the big corporate and the startup? Is the DNA compatible between these two players? Knowing there's differences between big and small companies, but does the founder get it? Does it get what it feels like to work with a big corporation, the speed or lack of, and why that exists. So we do a lot of that. And then some of it is, very traditional. I would call it VC evaluation, which is like, who's the founding team? What is their product market fit? What is the product itself? What is the price of that? Does it scale, right? So what we try and do is look, not only is this going to work for a pilot, but what does the scale up version look like? Are these compatible partners past this first MVP type program? And so we look at it, very objectively. I think it's one of the values of being a third party is that we can kind of say, hey, hold on a second. These two startups look exactly the same, but when you get to the second program, startup A is going to perform better because of X, Y, Z. But we really try and look at, the founding team, reasons to believe. Have they worked with other corporates before? How did that go? Did the corporate then re-up and spend money on it? So there's things like that. And then really, are we solving the problem that is important is one that gets lost. And then the next piece is like, okay, so what does this look like, this partnership? Like, what do both sides want? And so we spend a lot of time after the selection also mapping out, okay, what does this first MVP look like? What are the deliverables? Where might we get stuck? What are the problems both sides see up front? And so we spend a lot of time really thinking about this to make sure that both parties are very clear, very transparent on what their objectives are, both short and long term. And that way there are no surprises. And we try and timestamp this, meaning we want both the startup and the corporate to know what they have to put in over the next 60 days in terms of time, resources, money, what they might expect to get out, so that we're all kind of rowing in the same direction right from the jump. And we find that alleviates a lot of the stress and tension that normally has happened when you have a big company and a small company trying to work together.
So to unpack a couple different things, you mentioned that the best starting point for this is let's say a really clear, a good problem to solve. How often when corporates kind of bring you the initial problem statement, I would say, how often are those problem statements or problem framings sufficient or do they need a little bit of work, a little bit of polishing, a little bit of refinement before you cast the net out to the world?
Yeah, we tend to spend some time with them on that problem statement. Some have a really, really good idea. This is what we're trying to solve. And we spend some time prodding on that and trying to figure out if the problem statement is the actual problem or if there's one earlier on, right? It's the Band-Aid versus the real issue. And so we do some facilitation work to make sure that all the stakeholders are engaged. They agree this is the problem we're solving. And then we think through, like, if we solve this problem, what does that do for you? And so that effort up front kind of teases out where we maybe need to go deeper. But each client's a little different. We're working with a really large client right now where we're doing a bit of a listening tour of their C-suite. And we think we know where we want to go, but we want to make sure that the CIO, the CTO, like all the C's, all kind of agree, or at least know what success might look like from their perspective, to inform us. And sometimes we say, okay, hey, look, there's some discrepancy here, but we do think we're on the right track, and this is what's going to be disruptive. And so it's a bit of an iteration up front, but that time up front is not wasted. That actually, a lot of success comes out of that moment of really poking at this question and really understanding the why. Why are we doing this, and what's the outcome that is desired?
So, Fred, you talked a little bit about casting the net for startups, and when you're looking for startups, let's talk about some of the criteria or the considerations that are going through your team's mind. So, first of all, are there particular stages of startups that you're looking to bring into the fold, or are you really kind of casting a very broad net in terms of overall startup maturity?
Yeah, it's an awesome question, Brent. We always start with what's the desired outcome that the big company is looking for. How big is the problem they need to be solved? How fast they need to solve it? So we have some sliding scale depending on what that objective is. But for the most part, we focus on what we call enterprise ready startups. That usually means that they are pre-Series A, but that they have they are not idea stage. They have a product that has been validated, that has market fit, and they're at this inflection point where they're ready to go. They've sort of figured out what their thing is, how it's going to help somebody, and they need that sort of really blue chip client to get going. That's our sweet spot. Is most of the programs are there because it's early enough that it's usually a net new solution that a large company hasn't seen before or isn't aware of. So it can give them a big competitive advantage, rather than sort of the status quo solutions that are out there. But what's cool about the non-equity accelerator model is that we have flexibility. So we have a very public facing program with a large media and tech company where the group of startups that went through it were Series C, Series B, Series A, all the way down to an idea stage that was like super nascent, but was like spot on for what they were trying to do. So we have the ability and flexibility to go find what's right for that client and that problem. But for the most part, we're right in that, I would say, just before Series A zone is where a majority of our sourcing and actual programs happen.
Got it. And as you think about casting the net from a geographical standpoint, what's your approach there? Are you looking in specific regions, specific corners of the world, or again casting a very broad net there as well?
Yeah, so we go very broad on sourcing, and very much global. I looked at some of our recent programs, and about 60% of the startups were actually from outside the United States. When you look at within the United States, there certainly are startups from San Francisco and New York, but there are just as many from Austin, Texas, and Boston, and Birmingham, Alabama, and Detroit. And we believe part of our company culture, and it's been proven out over time, is the best solutions can come from anywhere. With all the technology advances, the spread of information, how cheap it is to launch a company at this point. Ideas are really bubbling up in all different places. So I very much don't subscribe to the idea that innovation happens in these geographic ecosystems, certainly you could look to a Boston and be like, oh, well, isn't that where all the great health solutions or health tech is happening? A lot of health tech is happening there, but a lot of health tech happens outside of there and then moves there at a later stage because that's where the VC money is. You could do the same game in Silicon Valley or fintech to New York. But when you're getting to that pre-Series A, boy, it's bubbling up in all different parts of the world. And if you're really, our remit is to provide new solutions. So we need to look in places that are unexpected and then find the best of the best within that. And it's oftentimes not where you would suspect you should be looking.
So from an advice to founder standpoint, would you, it sounds like you would not necessarily advise founders that, hey, if you're trying to get visibility, you're trying to get attention, you have to be in San Francisco, you have to be in New York, you have to be in Boston. There's a case for staying where you are and making the best of the environment you're in?
Yeah, I mean, it's an awesome question. If you think about it from the founder standpoint, there's a lot of value from not being in one of those ecosystems. You can have a completely remote team, so you can source your talent for your staff anywhere. You don't have to go meet somebody at Harvard, right, to come work. So you don't have to be in Boston. You can be wherever. And so I think because of that, you could start a company. I'll pick on Birmingham, Alabama. I went to high school there, so I'll do the Birmingham game. Like, you can be in Birmingham, build a team that is global. You don't have to pay New York City rents. You don't have to pay the talent that you would pay for San Francisco. And also at that early stage, lowering that cost to keep yourself in business is really important as you figure out your product market fit. You can move to those big cities as you go for your Series B or A, even if you wanted to, but BC. But I don't think there's a true value out of the gate that negates the cost difference. So I would say wherever you're from, wherever you came up with the idea, go for it. Like that's as good a place as any. And I think, the internet technology enables you to get to whatever resources those cities once offered, right? And I think there used to be some really cool things about like, oh, there's a startup community, right? You could all go meet for coffee every Thursday in New York, right? There are all these meetups and like, there's something to that. But I don't think it outweighs the ability to focus on your business and what you're trying to do. So I wouldn't recommend you moving someplace unless there was a real good reason for it.
So Fred, several times you've mentioned the speed and the pace, right? Could you talk a little bit about how working with startups can help change the pace of innovation for a large corporation?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, as a founder, you are really building the plane as it's crashing. Like you were up there, you jumped off the cliff, you've got wings, and now you're like, oh, I got to get the engine to work. I've got to do all these things. And like you were just running out of cash all day, every day. And you've bet your future, your life, you've left a cushy job or you've started out on your own. This is your thing. You're all in. And there is no way to recreate that. That is a standalone experience as a founder. I've done it a few times. It is, I don't know if I would recommend it to others, right? But there's a ticking clock. You're watching it going, okay, I got to get this deal by this date, right? And so you're building at a speed that is hard to understand for anyone else. On a corporate side, you've got the opposite point of view. You don't want to do no harm to the patient, right? The core is making money. It's doing its thing. You don't want to take unnecessary risk. And so there is a fundamental difference of speed between the two, both of which has a purpose and is there. And what's kind of cool is when you put them together, the right partners, you have the opportunity of helping the startup think bigger, see what the potential is to really scale their idea. And on the flip side, for the large organization, you get just infused with this energy, we're going to go fast and we're going to solve things and we're going to make choices and take chances. And you do it in a sandbox, right? So it's not offending the core or risking anything that's super important on the big company side. But like, boy, all of a sudden, the two things we always hear back when we kind of facilitate at the end, like, okay, give us feedback. There's a natural energy that is just infectious. Everybody loves working on these types of programs because they're fast, they're dynamic. They feel like you're changing the world kind of feeling that like just only an entrepreneur can embed. But the corporates that work on this feel that It just goes faster. There's outcomes. The other big piece of feedback you get is like, now I'm thinking differently of my existing projects. Boy, what I thought took 18 months, that person just did it in 18 days. How do I rethink how I'm looking at my projects? Can I operate them faster? Can I take some of this, I'll call it venture mindset of like stage gating and moving faster and being willing to make some mistakes? And by the way, it works on the other side. Founders come out of it and go, oh, now I understand why these controls are in place. I'm going to borrow language from that 72-page legal contract and put it into my next scope of work, right? Like, so there's a real beauty here of these two parties coming together and doing it in a way that makes sense, because otherwise it can be really painful, because they're just built to operate differently in terms of size, scale, risk, all those things. So you just have to kind of figure out how to put them on a path where they can work together and the best of each of them rubs off on each other.
So Fred, you used a term that I frequently use, a term I like, sandbox. So can you, in your definition, what is a sandbox? Why is it important? What purpose does it solve?
It solves a few purposes. The way I mean it is essentially you create whether it's a walled garden or a sandbox, something to the side that does not impact the huge organization. The best way to think about it is technology, right? If you try and get consumer information out of a large CPG company, you are going to spend a year and a half in paperwork, because they are very serious. They have to protect that information at all costs, right? If they don't do that, it could rupture the huge company, no matter how many billions of dollars they are. So what you do is you create this sort of sandbox. Maybe it's anonymized data. Maybe it doesn't connect in with the CRM of the big company, right? Whatever it might be, you create this play space. The reason it's called a sandbox, right, is like you can go play over there without it messing up the rest of the playground. So the sand doesn't get on the slide, right? And so you go over here, you got your sandbox. And within those walls, you can take some big risks because it's not impacting the mothership. And so the reason it's important is, one, it gives the big company comfort. Okay, we can do this thing over here. You're not going to hurt the moneymaker. Go ahead, try your thing, right? So it gives you permission to go. It also makes everything go faster, because now you're talking to legal and they're like, oh, well, the risk is different. Okay, yeah, we can do 30-day payment terms. Yeah, we don't need that big of an insurance policy as long as it stays over here. Right. And so it enables you to get to the point where you can prove out that this relationship has true value to the organization and to the startup. And now you're willing to go through the big procurement song and dance because you've got the case study. You've got the proof that, hey, this thing did this. This is now a business case that everybody is on board with. So it just gives you an area to go play in, to try some things that's a little safe, but also allows you to take the risks you need to prove out the hypothesis.
So Fred, you've talked a little bit about what some of these successful partnerships can look like. What does it look like, right? Or do you have corporate customers and startups that are working together to co-create entirely new solutions, bring entirely new ideas, kind of from scratch? Does that happen?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, we work with a lot of CVC groups, and in that, oftentimes they want to be testing with startups and doing things beyond just writing a check, right? So we have the opportunity to bring in other business units throughout the organization, give them visibility. We have some CVCs that use us almost as like an internal event platform, right? Where we're kind of going to do like a Shark Tank kind of vibe and run these pilots that bring in the business units and different leaders and also de-risk their pipeline, right? Because we're going to see all the early stage companies. And so that creates a pretty interesting deal flow for CVC. So the first thing I would say is like, we work really closely with a lot of CVCs as an extension of what they do. The other piece is like, they're always looking for insights back into the business. And a lot of the work we do pulls those insights for them. So it's very complementary to CVC. The part that's different is this idea of moving to partnership and not necessarily tying equity to every transaction. So what do you need to do differently is you need some sort of function that enables you to talk to the business units, to gather their pain points, to find those problems we're solving. And we have some clients where like they have that already internally. And we have others that are like, hey, we need you, VentureFuel, to help us go out into the business and find, people to raise their hands and help them understand their problems. You need to be able to find what those problems are we're solving. And then you need to build like a repeatable framework. And so this idea of like, here's the problem. Okay, now we go find all the potential solutions. We then have to vet down to the right ones. We need a group to decide which is the actual right one. And then we have to build out what that pilot looks like, that partnership. And how do we scope it? And when's the end date? And how do we make sure the startup and the big company both keep moving and keep the trains on time? Right. So there's that whole piece of this. That said, that doesn't have to be a big team. We're built to be that augmentation for our clients. So you need one person that's thinking about it. At least you can have a whole bunch of people doing it. We have some clients that this is a big part of their business. So it just depends a little on their internal setup. But really the mindset shift is that not every transaction between the big company and the startup needs to be an investment. And that is very freeing to a lot of our CVC partners, because they see early stage companies that they're like, oh, this is great, but like, I can't justify us investing in them. They haven't proven it yet. Right. And so we can be the model for which to prove it. They also sometimes go, geez, this is a really interesting startup I found, but they're not raising right now. So I have no way to engage them. Well, here's a way to engage them. You can bring them in and have them work with the core business, and then there's an opportunity, right? So it actually is it's an enhancer to existing CVCs. And we find ourselves kind of working very closely with the CVC teams and often for them in this regard.
So for large companies, are they predominantly looking at moonshots, or are they looking at, kind of the I guess the alternative is jump shots, right? Like what sort of horizon are a lot of the corporate partners working on?
Yeah, it's hilarious. We were laughing on the prep call about it. Is like, that I always call it the CEO catching up on like Harvard Business Review or something like that, where they read something in the plane, and by the time they land, it's what's our strategy on X, insert whatever technology they just read about. And as a CVC group, you're at the tip of the spear, right? So you need to be ready for that. I think what's interesting is you never want to be looking for technology and then looking for a problem that technology is going to solve. And that's really where we start, is we say, forget about Gen AI or the metaverse or Web3 or whatever the thing is, blockchain at the moment, right? And you go, what are you trying to accomplish? What is the business challenge? All right, let's start there. And then there might be one of those, trendy words that is the solve. But like, you got to always start with like, what are you trying to achieve? Now, we've run multiple programs that have Gen AI as the core of it. Multiple. I think the last count we've looked over 3,000 generative AI startups in the past 18 months, and like actually talk to them, right? So it's a big endeavor. And there's a lot of good there that is happening, a lot of opportunities. But we never kind of go like, hey, we found this great Gen AI startup. Where in your business might it be used? That's the wrong way. That's not going to work because at best, the business unit is going to roll their eyes and go, okay, this is a CEO project. Let's run the pilot. They'll get distracted and go to something else, and we can go back to our core business. What you want to do is go the other direction and be like, hey, business unit, what are you having a hard time solving? What matters to you? What is your KPI? What is your North Star pillar? All right, let's start there. Now let's go find the best new technologies that help you do that better, faster, more efficiently, with greater growth, right? All the different things. Now it's not just a flash in the pan. Now it has stickiness. Now it's something like, oh, that worked. Now we want to scale it across the organization. So we try and start with the problem. We certainly, because of the work we do, we usually get the whisper of what that technology is before the CEO does. So we're able to help our clients and partners to say, okay, here's here's what's happening in that space so that you can write the strategic brief and insights back to the CEO. But what's the problem? What's the problem we're solving? And maybe this is the solution. But you don't want to be chasing tech because it changes too fast.
So how do you overcome some of the challenges around, kind of the not invented here syndrome, around that risk adversity? Like how do you deal with some of those challenges on the corporate side?
Yeah, totally. And what's funny is the hammers are the shiny, fun thing. Like, ooh, like the amount of people that were like, we're trying to figure out our metaverse strategy. And like the amount of times I said, why? Like I was like, I don't get it for what you're trying to do. I get that it's cool. It's interesting. It feels like it could be something, but like, is it solving a problem you have? Is it opening up a market that you're curious about or that could drive real, revenue for your organization? Usually the answer was no. And like, that's okay too. Like you can go play, like, especially in marketing, right? Where you can be like, okay, like we want to go build an experience and get some press out of it. As long as you know why you're doing it, that's fine. But I think really understanding what kind of house you're trying to build, and then do you need a hammer, a nail, or a different tool is really the big question.
So Fred, turning towards the future a little bit, how do you see corporate innovation, particularly with some of these large corporations, evolving in the years to come, in the future?
Yeah, I think you're going to see a move from the two extremes of just R&D or just M&A. I think there is this world where you can lean into partnerships a lot more, and that will accelerate R&D, right? You can start to augment that through partnerships, which in turn will de-risk M&A. I think that is going to be a fundamental change. You've sort of seen some waves that have happened over time here, where it was sort of like, we can do it all ourselves, was the big corporate vibe. And then it was, we're going to get disrupted. Everybody freak out, right? Like we have to buy every startup that's out there. And then it was like, wait a second, maybe we could disrupt ourselves. And so you see these sort of iterations of figuring this out. And truthfully, this notion of being able to partner with your disruptor is really interesting, because for a startup, it's very hard to scale. I'm more interested in the B2B side of things. And I think that there's an opportunity here for true partnership that leads to great outcomes for both the corporate and the startup. And so I think you're going to see big corporates become less worried about not invented here syndrome, more open to co-creating, co-development. And I think that you're going to see CVCs evolve from just being a VC within a corporate, and more of this sort of corporate venture partnership that has an investment capability, where that's a big part of what they do. But they're also now, okay, how do we partner with startups? How do we try things in adjacent markets? How do we spot new growth opportunities? So you start to see this become more of a corporate strategy initiative, where that's normally where CVC sits, but you start to go up a little bit, where this is one of the levers that they can pull. And I think Gen AI will play a role in this also, in that you can start to identify different growth areas and pockets of working and things like that. So I think, to kind of put a bow on the whole conversation, I think you're going to see large organizations start to become more partner oriented with startups. And I think startups are realizing, right, on the flip side, startups used to be so scared that, here's the big corporate, they're slow, they're awful, I would never work there, they're just going to try and buy me. And now they're like, wait a second, like this is better than venture capital. Like they don't want any equity. They're going to write me a check that I can cash, right, with no strings attached, to do the thing I want to do. And by the way, they're going to need it more and bigger, and then I can go work with other people. So it's like this sort of like evolution on both sides, where they're realizing that they are symbiotic. When partnered the right way, this is a really truly mutual beneficial arrangement that they both can use to put them in a competitive advantage to whoever they're going up against.
So Fred, this has been a fascinating discussion. And what I'd like to do is close out with two similar, similar questions. So first of all, for corporates who are, looking to take the first step, what would be your parting advice, to those corporates who really want to explore more of the corporate venture partnership type model?
Yeah, those are always the most fun, right? Because I think starting with a problem, it's often hard to figure out exactly what that right problem is. Once we have that, that's where our process really starts to hum. What's really fun is when we get that permission. We've done a few of these. We really have buy-in from all the executives, everyone involved on the large corporate side, and we say, okay, where are the growth areas? And obviously, large organizations are thinking about this all the time, right? So we can kind of piggyback off of what the work they've already done, and maybe they're looking at, okay, how do we turn our core product into a service? How do we productize the services that we have? Those types of things. And that's what's really fun is we kind of take it from the theoretical of what could be, how might we do X, Y, Z, all those types of traditional consulting questions to here's how you might do that. Here's how we might actually do it. Here are startups that are doing this in adjacent industries or in non-adjacent industries, but you could take their technology and turn one piece and it'll work for your industry. That's part of what we love as a company is I would say if we had a superpower, it's this idea of like creative adjacency, of thinking about problems in ways that the R&D team or the scientists or the big company that's been doing it for 30 years, they won't think that way because we just get exposed to so many different new technologies and startups that our company mindset is very much like, oh, well, did you see that thing over here that was in the pharma industry? I bet that would work in CPG, which would work in automotive. And so I think what you're going to see over time is those creative adjacencies and taking technology that's starting to work in one industry and moving it to another seemingly unrelated industry is how you're going to spot these growth opportunities. And so we love those sort of blue ocean moments where it's like, hey, these are our core businesses. Where else should we be looking? How might we, build another $1 billion business and say, okay, well, here's how. These are the people you would partner with to get that going, to test if your hypothesis is right. Or have you ever thought about this? And so that's a lot of fun is really kind of going out there and spotting things that can fundamentally change a really large company's trajectory.
So Fred, then the counter question, what advice would you give to startups that are looking to get involved in more of that corporate venture partnership type of model?
Yeah, I mean, we're always looking at startups. So reaching out to us, we're always happy to talk to any startup, understand what they're working on. What we're very good at is not spinning a startup's wheels, taking time from the founder. So if we do not have an opportunity for them, we tell them that pretty quickly, but we'll always kind of make note of them to discover that they're there. I think the biggest thing for a startup founder to recognize is when you need to find the decision maker at the corporate. You need to find a budget. You need to find a problem that is going to be solved. The idea of sort of this nice to have type of vibe, like you're not going to get the deal done with any speed that you need as a founder. You have to make sure that somebody with money cares about the problem you're solving, or move to the next corporate. Find the corporate that has the problem that you want to solve, because then you're going to move faster, relatively. It's not going to be as fast as you want as a founder, but that's the opportunity. And so, I think a lot of founders early on maybe don't have a lot of sales experience. So they kind of do the spray and pray philosophy. They send an email out to 1,000 different corporates and like see who raises their hand. Oftentimes the person that raises their hand is the person that doesn't have a real problem that they're focused on solving, right? They're maybe a little bored and they're like, oh, that sounds fun. I like startups. And then you get into this long, like spin your wheels. And every founder has, there's a great professor at Harvard who talks about salespeople have happy ears. No matter what you say to them, they hear the deal progressing in their mind, right? You could say, no, I'm not interested. And they're like, oh, they said there's a chance. And so I think as a founder, you have that as a disposition. So what you want to do is ask the corporate, hey, is this a problem that you guys are focused on now? Is this something that is important to your organization? Do you have money to do this? Which is always the awkward question. Or is this something you are going to invest in solving? You have to get to that point. Because otherwise, like a corporate can tell you all the things you want to hear. And then all of a sudden that person that's talking to you gets rotated and you're back to zero. And there wasn't a problem to be solved. So you didn't get through. So I think a big part of a startup founder's journey is identifying problems that need to be solved that you can solve, and finding those people with budget. So this corporate venture partnership model, there is a real problem, there is a real budget, and the goal is to solve it as quickly as possible, which aligns with everything a founder wants, right? So you kind of want to find those opportunities, whether that's through us, whether that is directly with a corporate, but really making sure you're solving something that's important to the large organization.
So Fred, this has been a fantastic discussion. It's been really informative. It's been a lot of fun. I just want to thank you for spending the time with us today and our audience, and really wish you and your team at VentureFuel all the best in all of your endeavors.
Brent, thank you. It's been a pleasure. I loved your questions. It's always fun to think this through and talk about it, especially with somebody that's passionate about it, like I am. So anytime, I'm happy to share thoughts on this, and would love to hear from any of your listeners that found any part of this inspiring to them.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
The Decoding Innovation podcast series is a limited production of the EY Nottingham Spurk Innovation Hub, based in Cleveland, Ohio. For more information, visit our website at ey.com/decodinginnovation. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, leave a review wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to spread the word.